The bustling streets of Charlotte, North Carolina, were alive with activity one sunny afternoon. Sidewalks were filled with shoppers, families, and professionals moving purposefully through the downtown area. Among them was Margot Hayes, a 72-year-old woman of dignified stature, her gray hair framing her sharp, almond-shaped eyes. Margot carried a small tote bag as she walked to her car, unaware that her routine day was about to take a dramatic turn. She didn't notice the squad car parked by the curb, its windows slightly down as officers inside observed the passers-by. "Excuse me, ma'am." A sharp voice interrupted the hum of the street. Margot turned to find a tall police officer approaching her. His expression was a mix of suspicion and authority, and his eyes flicked to her tote bag. "What's in the bag?" Margot blinked, surprised by the abrupt confrontation. "Just some groceries," she replied calmly, holding up the bag. Inside were a loaf of bread, fresh produce, and a bottle of water. Her composed demeanor didn't seem to appease the officer. His partner joined him, standing a step behind. They exchanged a glance before the first officer's tone hardened. "We received a report of a shoplifting incident nearby. You match the description of the suspect." Margot's eyes widened. "There must be a mistake," she said firmly. "I haven't stolen anything." The officer's expression didn't change. "We need to check your bag." Around them, a small crowd began to gather, murmuring among themselves. Some took out their phones, recording the exchange. Margot handed over her tote bag, watching silently as the officer searched through it. When he found only groceries, his frown deepened. "We're going to need you to come with us," he said. Margot took a step back, her voice rising slightly. "For what? I've done nothing wrong." The officer ignored her protests, pulling out handcuffs. "You can explain yourself at the station." Margot stood her ground, lifting her chin as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. "You've made a mistake," she said, her voice cutting through the growing crowd's chatter. The onlookers voiced their disbelief, with one young man shouting, "She didn't do anything." Phones captured every moment as Margot was escorted to the patrol car. What the officers didn't realize was that Margot Hayes wasn't just any woman. She was the state's chief prosecutor, and they were about to learn how grave their mistake was. The police car's sirens remained silent as it pulled into the precinct. Inside, Margot sat with her hands bound, her face calm but her mind racing. She refused to show the frustration simmering beneath her composed exterior. The officer who had arrested her, Bradley Turner, led her through the bustling precinct. The sounds of ringing phones and clacking keyboards filled the air, but Margot's entrance seemed to draw every eye. Turner guided her to a small, gray interrogation room. Its harsh fluorescent lighting and cold metal furniture only heightened the unwelcoming atmosphere. He gestured for her to sit, and Margot complied without a word. "Name?" Turner asked, flipping open his notebook. "Margot Hayes," she replied evenly. The name didn't register with Turner. He continued, "You match the description of a suspect in a theft case at Mason's Market. Black female, gray hair, wearing a light blue coat." He pointed at her attire as if to emphasize his point. Margot glanced at her coat. "And do you typically make arrests based solely on such vague descriptions?" she asked. Turner's jaw tightened. "The store owner identified you as someone who left without paying," he said, his tone defensive. "Did this store owner provide any evidence? Security footage, perhaps? Or is this based entirely on assumption?" Margot's pointed questions seemed to unsettle Turner. He muttered something about looking into it and left the room. Meanwhile, at Mason's Market, another officer apprehended the real thief, a younger woman wearing a similar blue coat. When the store employee reviewed the security footage, they quickly confirmed the mistake. By then, videos of Margot's calm defiance during her arrest had already gone viral. Social media erupted with outrage, demanding justice under hashtags like #JusticeForMargot and #MistakenIdentity. At the precinct, Turner received a call from his colleague at Mason's Market. "We've got the real suspect," the voice on the other end said. "Turns out the woman you brought in isn't involved. Security footage confirms it." Turner's stomach sank. "You're sure?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "Positive." Turner returned to the interrogation room, his steps heavy. He opened the door, meeting Margot's sharp gaze. For the first time, he hesitated. "We verified that you're not involved in the theft," he began. "You're free to go." Margot stood slowly, her movements deliberate. "And the apology?" she asked coolly. Turner's face flushed. "We acted on the information we had," he stammered. Margot nodded curtly and walked past him, leaving the precinct without another word. Outside, a crowd had gathered, including reporters and activists holding signs demanding accountability. The crowd erupted in applause as Margot emerged, acknowledging them with a brief wave before heading home. Back at her desk, Margot reviewed the footage and statements flooding her inbox. As the state's chief prosecutor, she knew this incident wasn't just personal. It was emblematic of a systemic problem, a justice system too often guided by bias rather than evidence. In the following days, Margot took action. She filed a formal complaint against Officer Turner and the precinct. She also began drafting proposals for systemic reform, including mandatory bias training for officers and stricter protocols for evidence verification. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation during the hearing. Turner sat at the defendant's table, his confidence visibly shaken, when Margot entered, accompanied by officials from the Attorney General's office. The atmosphere shifted. Turner's face paled as he realized the gravity of the situation. Taking the witness stand, Margot recounted her experience with precision and emotion. "This isn't just about me," she said. "It's about a system that allows bias to cloud judgment. If this can happen to me, what hope do others have?" Turner's lawyer attempted to defend his client, citing protocol, but Margot's pointed rebuttals dismantled their arguments. When Turner was given the chance to apologize, he stammered out a regretful, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause harm." Margot's response was measured. "I accept your apology, but change requires more than words. It requires action." Her statement resonated far beyond the courtroom. Videos of her speech spread online, sparking nationwide discussions about systemic racism and accountability in law enforcement. Activists organized rallies, and lawmakers began considering policy changes inspired by Margot's proposals. Weeks later, Margot stood at a podium addressing a packed auditorium. "Justice isn't just a concept," she said. "It's a responsibility, and it's on all of us to ensure that responsibility is met with fairness, empathy, and accountability." The audience erupted in applause, but Margot's gaze remained steady. She knew the road ahead would be long, but she was committed to paving the way for lasting change. Meanwhile, Turner, now retired, began volunteering with community organizations to rebuild trust and learn from his mistakes. Margot's initiatives gained traction, leading to new training programs and policy reforms aimed at reducing bias in policing. As the sun set one evening, Margot reflected on the events that had unfolded. She knew her story was no longer just her own. It had become a beacon of hope and a call to action for countless others. Change wouldn't come overnight, but with every step forward, Margot believed a more just and equitable world was within reach.